by EMC as well as crops and visuals.
Okay, terrific. Let's go ahead and start the meeting then. Caroline, if you call roll.
Commissioner Bulkley.
Present.
Chair Curry.
Here.
Commissioner Mendel.
Here.
Commissioner Truax.
Here.
And I made a note that the meeting was called to order at 12:02.
Okay, thanks. I understand we don't have any meetings or minutes or presentations.
So
Well, we do have
we have a
presentation.
presentation today by EMC Research.
Okay.
Regarding the October 23rd survey that we did with Alabama.
Yeah.
A couple things on the presentation. So the presentation is going to go over the work that they did in our community to get a understanding kind of support levels for the district and potential measures. There's another item actually coming up in Old Business 7A that deals with the kind of next steps. So you might want to tailor some of your questions that pick up. So the question regarding the polling, this is the right spot to ask. It was kind of a next steps question. It might make more sense further down the agenda.
Okay.
And we're gonna have Ian with the group giving the presentation. Just a couple things to note. The packet includes exact same number you'll see up on the board as well as the one that's in front of you. It just has the words draft on it. This is the exact same presentation, just from the agenda. And kind of up to the board as far as how you like. They can either give you the whole presentation and save questions for later, if you're trying to kind of move through it. But if you prefer to ask questions as we go through the slides, you're obviously welcome to. So it's your call as a board.
Okay. Why don't we go ahead and go through the whole thing before we ask questions?
So Ian, are you able to share from your side or you may have
I
to
am.
enable it? Okay.
I just clicked on share screen. It says host disabled participant screen sharing. So if we can address that, and I'll do it. If not, you can present on
2
your side.
seconds.
While we're waiting for that screen sharing to happen, I might as well introduce myself. I'm Ian Stewart, Senior Principal with EMC Research, and I'll be taking you through the presentation today. Also on the line is Kit with on my team that can give us any other background and questions you might need. There's Kit now. And so I think I have screen sharing available. I do. Just a minute. So you should be seeing the PowerPoint now, yes?
Mm-hmm.
Like I said, if you want to ask questions during, you can, but I will move through this. Let me first tell you what we did. We did a survey of voters in the Mammoth Lakes area. So we basically try to draw a boundary around the fire district, which is more or less the city, but there's mostly contiguous there. The survey we conducted October 11th to the 17th, that's a pretty standard timeline for a survey of this size. A total of 205 interviews, which is not a huge sample size, but remember, we're not talking about a large population. So we then take that and can project it to all voters in the district with a margin of error of plus or minus 6.8 percentage points. Essentially what that means is any numbers that you're seeing are accurate within that plus or minus 6.8 percentage points. I can go into more detail about margin of error if you're interested, but that's really what it means, is that any numbers you're seeing are accurate within that margin. And it is going to become a factor as we look at the survey results, because we have a few different changes in the survey that are in fact within that margin of error. We offer the survey in English and Spanish in a multimodal format, which means we're reaching people via email, text to web, live phones, a variety of other methods that we're using to try to get as many voters as we can included. I can speak more about that if you want to, but this is pretty industry standard these days. We're talking about a voter survey like this. Okay, first, some warm-up questions. Whenever we do a survey like this, we tend to ask a few things to get people warmed up. Don't really necessarily have anything to do with the topics at hand, but it's a way to get them engaged in the survey. We start with some of the key findings here that we found for you. First of all, there's a very positive reaction to the Mammoth Lakes Fire Department. I'll show you that in a few minutes. About 2/3 of voters say they would vote yes on the parcel tax measure. And that support doesn't really change, again, within that margin of error when we offer it at $83 a year. I'll show you that slide in a minute. We then go through some positive and negative information about the measure. Doesn't really impact things. Support stays roughly about the same. It does fluctuate a little bit during the survey. And then when we talk about what's most interesting to people in the measure, natural disasters, rapid emergency response, addressing dangerous conditions from heavy snowfall, and protection from fires and other disasters are the key items that are in there that are attractive. And I'll show you those in more detail in a minute. So that first warm-up question that I mentioned to you, we ask a right direction, wrong track question. We've asked this about this in the same language we've done for the last 30 years. Are things going in the right direction, or are they pretty far off on the wrong track? Believe it or not, this is actually more positive than in most places in the country. 49% right direction and 45% wrong track. In a lot of other parts of the country, you're going to see the wrong track numbers into the 60s or higher. So actually feeling pretty good about this. One of the first things I want to draw your attention to, we don't get a chance to do a ton of these crosstabs in a survey of this size. When you think about a survey of about 200 interviews, our crosstabs can only really be about 50% of the audience, right? Which is our ability to look at how do those that are identified one way or another, either in this instance, residents under 15 years or residents over 15 years, is a group of sub-respondents that are about even, right? You can see the residents under 15 years make about 48% of the total voters. The other side make up about the 15 plus make up 50%. So they have a very different view of the right direction on track. Shorter term residents, much better right direction number. Longer term residents, much worse numbers, right? That also tends to correlate with age, as does the homeowner crosstab that you're seeing in the far right there. Just to give you a sense, we have limited crosstabs for the survey. And in fact, we don't really go into them much at all during this presentation, but they are available in case you're curious about what's happening there in any kind of subgroup. So first, what I'm showing you here, we're still pretty early in the survey. We're asking favorability. So these questions are all on the same scale of strongly favorable to strongly unfavorable. You can see the blue are the favorable, the dark blue being the strongly favorable, the light blue being the somewhat favorable, and then the reds being the somewhat or strongly unfavorable. These are randomized, so none of these appear in the same order for people, right? So someone might get the Mammoth Lakes Firefighter Association first, someone else might get Mammoth Lakes Fire Protection District first, but they're all randomized. We do that a lot in the survey to ensure that there is no order bias to the survey. So our takeaways here is to look at the favorability of these entities, and they're all amazingly strong, right? So the Mammoth Lakes Fire Department, 93% favorable. Virtually no one, a tiny proportion, 5%, have an unfavorable opinion of the fire department. The same goes for the Mammoth Lake Fire Protection District, but the favorability ratio comes down a bit, and that mostly comes from the I don't have an opinion or I haven't heard of that organization. You see the gray bar that increased there on that second line? And then finally, the Mammoth Lakes Firefighters Association, very similar idea, almost no unfavorability, really strong favorable, but an increasing percentage of people that say, well, I don't know who that is, or I can't quite give them a rating, right? But across the board, these are really strong ratings and a good indication that you have a strong relationship with voters. They like you, they generally know who you are, and they like what you're doing. The next one, we do this on a slightly different scale. This is an agree to disagree scale. Once again, these are randomized, so they're going to appear in different orders. Strongly agree, they're in the dark blue once again, the strongly disagree in the dark red, and in the middle there is the somewhat agree. You'll notice already we've got a bit of a different arrangement on this slide, right? When we look at the agreement levels. The first one, it's crucial to provide high quality fire protection services in our area, even if it means raising taxes. We're into the 70s with agreement, right? But you can see now the strongly agree is about 40%, whereas in the slide we were on before, where we're looking at much larger proportions in the favorability. These are going to be important for us as we think about reaching a 2/3 percentage, right? Looking at the percentage of the people who are in the somewhat agree category. So that second one is where it becomes really critical, right? Look at the strongly agree on I trust the Mammoth Lakes Fire Department to properly manage tax dollars. This is intentionally a difficult question to ask, right? We're asking people about a budget they're probably not particularly familiar with, although they are familiar with the function of the fire department. We're asking them to tell us how much do they trust that Mammoth Lakes will manage their tax dollars responsibly. The strongly agree is 27%, right? You'll notice that's a much bigger difference. The somewhat agree is 50%. So we're still getting into the 70+ range, well above a 2/3 percentage, but the intensity is dropping off quite a bit, right? And that's going to be important as we think about this in your past experience in the district and asking voters for money. It's these somewhat agree people, right, that are our weak spot, and the ones that we need to make sure we keep on board with any future requests that we give to them. The flip side of this is to ask a slightly different measure of tax sensitivity, which is taxes are already too high. I would never, and I'm going to put an emphasis on the word never, vote for a tax increase no matter how it might be used. And look at the agree disagree here. Now we're into disagree at 54%. This is good news for us. You have a majority disagreeing that the taxes are too high. But again, look at the agreement, 45%. So there is softness here, right? On most of the measures that I'm talking about today, lots of good positive news to share with you, with a tinge of sort of giving people pause, right? Of that 24% in the somewhat agree category that's saying, yeah, actually taxes might be too high. I might consider voting against the tax because it doesn't matter what it's going to be used for. Taxes are just too high. So this is our biggest challenge point, and one that we're going to have to work on, bring these people home to ensure that they say this is worth the tax dollars I'm paying to support the Mammoth Lakes Fire Department. Okay, now we're going to get into the measure itself. So we've done a bit of warm-up questions. We've asked some favorability. We've asked some agree disagrees that I've showed you. And now we just come out and say, all right, do you think that Mammoth Lakes needs more money? What's the need? Is it a great need, some need? And I want you to focus on just those two, first of all. The great need, right? So these are people you would say they're fully on board with the mission. They're going to vote for almost anything, right about 50%. And then we have this next group, 31%, that say some need, right? So they can be convinced that this is worth supporting, but there's some hesitation in there, right? Add those two together, we get to almost 80%. Once again, well above the 2/3 we need, but that some need proportion, that 30%, 31%, is the ones we want to focus on to say, we want to make sure those people come home and really say, not only do I think there's some need, but I'm going to support this measure. So then we ask the measure itself. And whenever we ask measures like this, we try to give people the actual measure language as close as we can to what we expect is going to appear on the ballot. You can see it here on the left in the gray box. We introduce it by giving them these details. You'll notice a couple of things in here. You'll notice we mentioned what it's going to be for. We talk about reducing the risk of wildfires, maintaining rapid response time for 911, attracting and retaining qualified firefighters, and funding space programs to improve wildfire prevention. We then say, should we support a measure levying 98% per parcel for 9 years to be adopted, providing about $925,000 annually in locally controlled funding? Again, important language to remember what's being offered to them, right? We're saying this money is staying locally. We also include an optional yearly increase that does not exceed the CPI, which usually is in that ballot language, and with some exemptions there along with oversight. We ask all that, we get a yes of about 69%. A pretty good place to start, but again, if our passage percentage is 2/3, we're really close to that number, right? We do the same thing by asking a follow-up to say, what if instead of $98, that was $83? And we remember the margin of error I talked about. This is statistically the same as these two questions, right? 69% yes and 71% yes versus 30% no and 28% no. Those are within the margin of error statistically. So there's really no difference in the two measure amounts. We get a slight bump, but not a bump that I can prove statistically from dropping the measure to 83% annually. But all this says, this is what you've experienced over the years, right? Very close to the passage number needed, but within a very small margin of error that it could go either way, depending on what happens in the future and how well we communicate with voters about the value here. So what we do next, after we ask that question, we say, all right, well, now I'm going to tell you what might be included in this measure. And the goal here is for us to understand what among these items is driving popularity. What are we going to talk about and focus on most? Because if you think about how much capacity people have to pay attention to things, right? They won't be able to know everything that's in this measure. They might be able to know only a few things. And it will behoove us to focus on the things that are the most popular. So the way that I go about doing this, there's a couple different measures. One is the mean score on the far right. But because all these items are pretty popular, what I'm going to focus on instead is the 7 percentage. You'll notice the scale on these questions. Again, they're all randomized. They're all presented in a slightly different order. The scale is 1 to 7, 1 being not at all important. That's the stuff in the red at the far right. And then the very important is the one I want to focus on first. That's the 7 measure, and that's in the blue there. So look at the blue percentages as we move down the list. We start at the very top, providing rapid 911 emergency medical response. 68% called that very important. That's a great place to start. Clearly, one of the most important items to voters in the district when they heard it. And you can compare that one to the one at the bottom, right? Still a really popular item, 51% saying ensuring essential equipment such as fire trucks and protective gear and technology up to date and well maintained, but not as strong as the first one by about, a 17-point difference. And clearly that's outside of the margin of error, right? Still important, but not quite as important as the first one. And you can look at the middle items, it sort of drops off in the percentage, giving it a 7 as you move down the list. But we're into the 50s and high and low 60s with each of these. Protection from fire and other potential natural disasters, addressing dangerous conditions that result from heavy snowfall. We do specifically talk about propane later on, but this was as close as we could get actually naming propane as we worked on the questionnaire together. These are all the kinds of items we're going to be focusing on as we talk about this, any sort of communications effort as we move forward, because they're the most popular items in here. So we then move on to a series of statements that people have made who support this measure. This is our way to sort of say, all right, if we took those items and packaged them to actual messaging, what would it look like? How would people react to them? We do this on a convincing scale. I'm only showing you the very and somewhat convincing, because we're trying to get a sense here of what are the most convincing items. You'll notice the first one, we combine the convincing at the far right in the black. The total convincing here, I just realized I can use my mouse. I don't have to use a pointer here. We're into the 80s here and then the 70s for total convincing. So clearly these two are doing better. Well, what's in there, right? This first one talks about that this money can only be spent here in the Mammoth Lakes Fire Protection District, can't be diverted to other places, and there's audits required. That's about 84% total convincing, 45% very convincing. So once again, the other 39%, right, that gets us to a large majority, 84%, but it also gets us to the 2/3 we need. So there are definitely some somewhat convinced voters in here, right, that we're going to need a lot of them to make sure we get to 2/3. The next one talks about, this is where propane comes into play, 83%. Really, it's statistically, as I said before, no difference between the first one, the most popular item on this list, and the second one. So you could really use them interchangeably. This one talks about our firefighters are first on the scene for more than just fires to respond to emergencies like auto accidents, propane line leaks, which we know is a big issue in the past, water rescues, and medical emergencies. This measure will make sure they stay equipped to keep our community safe every day and in every situation. The second most popular item. Between these two, we've got a really good story to tell that is convincing to the vast majority of voters. The other two are also pretty strong, but not quite as strong. So it's not as if we couldn't use them, but you can see that climate change is the third most popular in here, and there's no other funding source is the fourth most popular in here. Again, those two statistically aren't really that different. And in fact, overall, right, they're right about that 7-point change in margin of error. So they're all relatively popular, but those first two do test the best. So on the flip side, we then say, all right, here are some reasons that people have said we should oppose this measure. What I want to do just briefly is to go back and forth between these two and look at the total convincing percentage on both. And look, we're into the 80s and 70s here, but some of the strongest negative messages, 70s and 60s, right? That's right around that 2/3 mark of people saying they are convinced. So the first one here is that the measure is written so that it can last indefinitely and increase every single year. We need to find a more responsible way to fund the fire department than an endless tax increase. So 73% of voters, there's a bit of a difference in the intensity here between the very and somewhat convincing that you can see, right? This next one's actually more intense in terms of its convincingness. But this is sort of our giving us pause again, saying, all right, some of these, a good proportion, a large majority can be convinced that this never-ending indefinite tax is actually a problem for them. So we have to be able to overcome that as we communicate. The next one, housing affordability is a bigger problem. We can't just focus on firefighters. We'd invest money in programs that help make Mammoth Lake more affordable for everyone. 68% convincing. Again, that's right around that 2/3 mark. Same with the pandemic, that we're still struggling with the pandemic. Inflation's still high. It's tough to put food on the table. The next one, the local homeowners are already paying $441 a year, and we can't ask for more, at 63% convincing. So we have sort of good news on one side and some news that should give us pause on the other about the percentages of voters that are reacting negatively to these potential negative messages. The last one doesn't really work that well, so I won't focus on it. This is the progression through the survey. We start at that initial vote at 69 yes, 30 no. We get up to a high of 74-26. We go back down again to 68-32. Now, statistically, when you look at the yes number, it really is within the margin of error, but the net change is a little bit different. If you calculate the net change, we're moving about 12 points each time. We gain roughly about 12 points after the information, the positive information, and we lose it back again. We essentially give it all back at the end, and we end up right about at that threshold for passage. So what this tells us is, one of the reasons that it's been hard to pass a measure here is because we have just enough support to be at that 2/3, but we need to make sure everyone comes home in support of this measure to ensure that it passes. So to close that out, and I can take your questions, it's clear that voters recognize that the Mammoth Lakes Fire Department is doing well and like the district a lot. there is good support right at that 2/3 threshold for the 98% parcel tax per year. And voters generally agree that yes, they would be willing to raise taxes for that. The key factor, as I mentioned going forward, is ensuring that people understand what is in this measure, and it's all about the key elements that they are interested in. That they said to us was most important about investing in fire protection, and then informing voters about all those items, about being on the scene for emergencies, and clarifying that money can only be used in the fire district are among the most convincing messages tested in our survey. But it's clear that a lot of work needs to be done to ensure that they hear those messages. I'm gonna stop sharing and see if you had any questions that I did not cover during the presentation.
I have a quick question. Sensitivity around the price of the increase, it doesn't seem to be make very much of a difference, right? And while it went up and down a little bit, is there a reason to go either further up or further down? I mean, I don't know. It didn't appear that taking it to $70 a year was going to get some dramatic increase in votes. Is that a fair statement?
I think statistically, we obviously we didn't test 70, so we don't know, right? The gap between 98 and 83 annually, we're talking about a $15 difference. So yeah. I think it's going to be hard to really drop that number a significant amount to really increase the vote in any meaningful way.
Ian, if I could follow up on that, I had similar discussions with Mammoth Hospital because they did similar polling a few months ago, and they basically found the exact same things, that there is a level of support, and they had a wider range for what they were looking at, and they still found that level of support stay the same. I had these discussions with Robin and Erica as far as, should we be looking higher? They still feel like 100 is kind of the psychological threshold that you really don't want to cross, but you're going to have very limited gain by trying to go down to 70 or 60 and kind of chase something in that direction. And
right. And that's really the point. It's not at some point, and I think the 98 is probably the line in the sand that says, yeah, that's what we need, but we ought not chase a falling dollar bill here.
Yeah. The other area,
just to jump in, totally agree. I do think there is a psychological barrier at 100. And since we didn't test anything over 100, we don't really know, like it could drop a lot. But I also don't think, a lot of times we do see circumstances where the lower number does create more support and there's pressure on you to go for the lower number. In this case, I would stay with the 98 because, just being very frank about it, obviously you want to raise as much money as you can. And I don't see a significant advantage to dropping the number down other than it'll get you less money, which is obviously not an advantage.
The other thing you may have noticed in the presentation, we had some discussions on the front end. If you remember on our two previous measures, we had a CPI increase as well as no sunset on it. Again, talking with the team of props and measures, essentially nothing has passed that has both of those items in there. Taxpayers are looking for some level of accountability, and it's a compromise. You have to decide, do I want something that runs indefinitely, or do I want something that increases with CPI rates? What we did in the case that we measured was look at similar to Truckee. Truckee did, I believe, a 9 or 10 year on a similar measure that they had. It puts the onerous and, it puts pressure on the department then in 9 years that they have to come back and again, show that they've done good work to keep that funding going, but also provides that, we're not just asking for something indefinitely, essentially. So that's kind of a compromise there.
Just to add to that, the other advantage of a sunsetted item is that you get to go back and say, let's renew it, right? So the renewal language means you're not changing your tax rate essentially, right? You're just reapproving something you've already approved. So it does have some advantages down the road, but of course it comes with a drawback of having to go back to ask them again.
Can I ask a question? Sure. Actually, maybe three-part question now because you just talked about something that sunsetting something, but is this tax indefinite? Well, is safety and fire protection need indefinite? It is. So why wouldn't it be an indefinite item? But my question was regarding the $98. If I own a house that's worth $1.5 million I don't care if I pay $150 to protect it more versus the person who's got a house that they are struggling to pay for, that they paid $300,000 for. That $98 might be more to them. Why would it be just like the property tax is a percent of your value? Why wouldn't this also be a percent of the value? Because I'm wondering if demographically, fiscally demographically, the people who are responding in favor may be people who have a bigger parcel to protect than the person who's struggling to protect their day to day. Does that make sense?
I can't tackle the third one of your questions, but the first two, what I will say is, one, many districts actually do exactly that. EMS, 911 will have this be a 9. I'm not saying you have to do this. I'm just saying many districts will go with this 9-year, 7-year, 10-year renewal policy, because the idea is once we passed it once, coming back to ask you for a renewal is an easier lift than asking for a brand new tax. And so this is a way of saying, of reminding people, we're here in the community, providing you a service that we all think is a good thing. Let's do it again, right? And yes, it is ongoing. So it's a bit of a conundrum, but that's the way I'd answer that first one. The second one I'd answer is our voter universe here is reflective of the broader voter universe that is in Mammoth Lake. So the degree to which home ownership, home value, all the rest of that is reflected there, that's we're reflecting the same universe in our voter sample. To your last question about the mechanics of the per parcel or other values, I can't answer that question. Someone else is
Robin,
going
do
to
you
do
want to jump in? Because we did a bunch of research on doing a graduated tax and there were reasons not to. And Robin, since you sort of spearheaded that research, do you want to talk about that?
Sure. The way to parcel that out would be in a square footage tax. And I don't know that speaks directly to the value, right? If someone has a $3 million home, it might not be necessarily bigger, but just in the times of when they purchased it or when it was remodeled to what level. And it becomes very complicated for the voter. And what we've seen is that it's a downturn in support actually in the per square footage tax rate and how to explain that. And when voters are confused, there is less support for raising their taxes.
And actually, honestly, in a lot of cases, even at a flat rate, it's more wealthy people who are more likely to oppose just for reasons correlated to their political leanings. So it isn't always true that like if I own a bigger house, I'm more willing to pay that tax. In fact, it's often the opposite is true.
I did ask the same question a few months ago, so we have had they're good questions.
I have a question, and this is for you, Chief. My big concern is getting Station 2 manned over there. That's going to take 12 guys in order to do it 24/7 on there. If you figure a salary of about $60,000 a year for a firefighter, you're going to have to double that, figuring in pensions, uniforms, all the extras, medical costs and that. And that brings us up to about $1.5 million. And looking at this measure, we're going to generate, if it's passed, $925,000. It doesn't get us close to manning that. And so from my perspective, we're not asking enough on this measure in order to accomplish what I would like to see happen.
So if the question is directed at me, I'm sure that Rob and Erica could take a stab at it as well. But, so unfortunately, I agree with you. I'd actually say you're probably on the low side for what competitive salaries are. We do have to pay competitively because we just lost 2 of our firefighters to San Francisco, and we're just going to play this revolving door. You mentioned on a fire that one of your concerns was just the experience, and I hear you. I had concerns about the same kind of thing. We've got a good response right now, but they're all brand new. So I have to live in a world of compromises. I'll let Erica and Robin answer, but I don't see us passing anything. And again, my rough math was about 1.8 million. for what you're, recommending. I certainly
Mhm.
see the value of staffing Station 2. And that doesn't include all these, overhead costs that you're aware of that come all of a sudden when you're doing that. So I think we have to approach this from both sides. One is see what the community is willing to burden to bring services, and then look at what can we as a district do to best provide those services. As much as my life would be easier and I'd love to have, the reality is if we went to 3 battalions, my job per NFPA is to put 20 people on a fire scene. That means I need 60 individuals. I'm not going to get there in my career. I don't think we're going to get there in Tyson's career. So it's going to be a compromise and figuring out if I need to get 20 people on a fire scene, how do I best do that? I think an example of that is, the summer program that we did. We can't sustain that long term on our current funding and still keep up with all of our other obligations. But that was a good program. We had people, they weren't there 24/7, but we had people there for those 7 months during the day. The beauty of it is we have a culture here that those people come back and they keep responding. But we need to get them more time in the seat, get them more experience, and hold on to them so that we're not churning them over quite as much. So I would argue that, we're never going to get 12 firefighters out of this, but what we can do is take the current capacity we have and start to leverage it, give them more hours, give them more shifts, maybe bring on a couple more full-time and really start to bring it. It won't be where I'd like to be, but I think you'll be at a reasonable spot for this community. So I 100% hear you. I can ask Robin or Erica if they feel like we could get to a higher support level. But I did ask them that myself. I would love to see us get there.
Yeah, I mean, the answer to why, so in case anybody's wondering, well, why didn't we test a higher number? This is going to get a little technical and Ian can jump in too, but the biggest challenge with this survey methodologically is that it is such a small community. And normally when we do surveys, we do 400 interviews or more, which allows us to do what's called split sampling and basically dividing that group in two and asking one group one question and one group the other. Because Mammoth Lakes is so small, there's no way we're ever going to get to 400 interviews. And as you saw, we ended up getting just above 200, which frankly is better than we thought we'd do. And because that number is so small, you can't split it and still have valid results. So, and like, if you create an auction for people, hey, do you want to pay 120? How about 90? How about 80? You're not getting valid information, right? Because then people are like, well, sure, I'd rather pay 20, So because of the methodology, we were kind of limited in how many options we could ask here, and kind of arrived at the choices in conversation with the chief. Of course, it would be great to get more, but looking at these numbers and looking at, frankly, how close to the line it is at 98, and sort of just knowing the psychology of going into a 3-digit number, I can't promise this because maybe if we tested 120, that would have been okay, but I'm looking at it very nervous about trying to go higher.
I'd
The
like,
other thing I'd add, sorry, Robin, to interrupt. The other thing I'd add is, this is part of a bigger picture. Obviously, I recognize kind of your point that we need more services, and there are other things that we're going to leverage. We're looking at doing our municipal services review, which has implications. I put in for a $6 million grant a few months ago that I think has a reasonable opportunity. These things happen incrementally. I agree with you that we need to get there, but I believe, we're unfortunately not going to have a silver bullet. I'd rather work, with something that I think we have a solid chance at. I don't intend to lose a third time, I guess. So I'm trying to play every card in our favor.
Well, I agree completely, but the point was brought up. If you were to take it on a square footage basis or something like that, so that a guy that's got a $500,000 house isn't paying the same amount as somebody that's got a $3 million house on there. I know, looking at it from my point of view, $200 a year is insignificant when you've got a $1 million house.
The
And
problem is that, but that's not how voters view it. Those $1 million house people are actually more tax sensitive, not less. They don't think of it. Their psychology is not that it's less money to them, even though it is.
I would ask, I would not challenge you, but I'm just saying, are you Are you speaking in general or specific to this subject? Because in general, yes, maybe socially, they may be more fiscally sensitive, but for protection to their home or infrastructure to their small community, they might have a different opinion. One, because I'm going back to this, and I need to just, I'll end at this with 98 tax per year. How does that accord for inflation? What will that be worth in 3 years versus a percent of the tax increasing on my property tax now? I won't even feel it, but it'll increase every year. So it'll be more money every year per this proposition, if you will, than if you just step at 98 bucks, because 98 bucks today is 78 bucks in about 8 years, and so on and so on.
Robin, do you want to just go? I mean, I think, again, the two things that Robin was saying, first of all, it's not, and we do know this from experience, having tested graduated taxes in lots and lots of communities. There's two problems with them. One is that it isn't true that people who are wealthier have more costly homes are less tax sensitive. They're almost always more. But the other issue that Robin raised that's really important is confusion drives people to know. If people can't figure out where they would fall on that scale of how much it would cost them, or if it just sounds complicated on any tax measure, if I'm confused about it, I'm just like, forget it. I don't want that. And so the one benefit to having a flat rate is it's not confusing. This is just what everybody pays.
Right, yeah, I get that. I get that. If you can't tell them exactly what their portion would be, it's hard.
Right.
Hard to sell. I get that.
Hard to get their vote. Yeah.
I'd like to jump in on a couple of things. One, Chief mentioned, I'm not going to let us fail a third time. And you were very, very close in that last outreach. Slim margin of not passing. So we know that there is support in your community, even just a few years ago. Changing it and making it more complicated confuses people and will lower that opportunity to push it forward. Additionally, the truth is, and you're seeing it, your community, and this is a great example of passing the first measure is the hardest measure to pass. Once you pass a measure and you show diligence in transparency in how the funds are used, you show increased services to your community, it will be much easier to come back to your community and say, okay, look what we have done for you with what you have trusted us in funds to do for our community. We now need a little bit more to be able to do X, Y, Z. And you honestly, you don't have to wait 9 years to do that. Let's talk 5 years, 7 years, right? But let's get this across the finish line and then implement, show good stewardship, and then be able to come back and say, here's what we can do with X, Y, and Z. Does that resonate?
Not with me, it doesn't, because I want to get away from going back continually to the voters and saying, well, we need more, we need more, we need more. We get that with school districts. It seems like every time there's a ballot measure or a measure at all, the school board is on there. They need more money for schools. And so I'd rather see us go for a larger amount and be able to do the things that we want to do than keep coming back to the voters. That gets to be old. That's almost like playing gimmicks with the voters.
And respectfully, I don't want to play any gimmicks with the voters. I would say that it has worked for the school district, so they're obviously doing something right. The fact that you have to go back shows that you have to provide good services. So again, I don't see that as a gimmick. I see it more of having that accountability that you have to say, look, this is what we've done for you. Do you want to renew this? Do I have concerns about that? Absolutely. My number one job is the safety of our firefighters and our community. But right after that is, there's people are depending on these jobs. And, we've asked them to commit to us. So, I have no intention of letting them down. That said, there is a point where if we go out about this the wrong way and we lose a third time, we're not going to put ourselves in a good spot for the foreseeable future. So.
I
Yeah,
have
and like Robin said, just passing it the first time is the hardest, because then if you do a good job of saying, here's what happened with your money. And that component of it is important, right? You can't just pass it and then not communicate and sort of hope that people understand what you did with the money, because they won't. You have to kind of toot your own horn a little bit and say, here's what we used your money for. Here's the improved services you're getting. Then when you go back, it's much easier because people have gotten that messaging and they understand what they're paying for.
And
I have two.
I don't want to understate the value of renewal language, right? That the next time you go out, and I recognize exactly what you're saying, right? That having to go out every 9 or whatever years is challenging, frustrating. It feels like we're asking a lot, but that's a lengthy period of time. 9 years, a lot of voters will, one, forget that, but two, renewal. We've seen this over and over again on the polling that we've done. That being able to use the word renew what we've already invested in is really powerful in terms of selling people, oh, I'm already paying for this, I'm going to re-up it because I value that service, as opposed to having to convince them to do the entire increase each time.
I would add to what Ian's saying is that it's not like this is a slam dunk at $98. There's work to be done. That's really important. Ian, and maybe you can reiterate that, is that it's not, it's not, oh yes, this is easy peasy. There's a lot to do to get between now and November to educate and bring the community along in recognizing that this needs to pass.
Yeah, I hope that was clear from our presentation, that I kept mentioning, you know, the thin margin we're talking about, right? Getting to 74 would be incredible, but it represents a lot of work. And so when we're starting at essentially the rate we need to pass, we need everyone to show up. We need it to not rain that day. We need it, like, well, there's lots of stuff that we need to go right and to put in the work to be able to get even 98 passed.
Yeah, I was
think
quite.
that's really the point, because if we were farther above the margin here, I think that this would be potentially a wiser idea, but we're above, but very narrowly, right? Like there's not a lot of room for error here. And even the amount that we are above is going to require a fair amount of work and communication. So if we raise the bar and make this a more difficult task by kind of breaking the $100 psychological barrier, you know, count me as worried.
Yeah, so I
Betsy?
just wanted to jump in. So thanks, Roger. So a couple of things. One, I found it really interesting in reading through these numbers, just, you know, how similar they are to past experience, right? And I also think that, you know, the electorate in Mammoth has changed a little bit too. You know, in more recent elections, we have younger voters. But I wanted to go back to this idea of the graduated tax, and I realize it's probably impossible to poll on this, but Mammoth is kind of a unique community in that some of our most expensive properties are owned by non-voters because they're second homes. And so those are not the people who are voting. So I just wondered if there's any way to take that into account, because it seems to me like someone who, you know, is renting a place or maybe just got into their first condo, they're, you know, they may not object so much to, like, hey, like, let's tax the guy who's up in the bluffs more, just psychologically. And I wondered if there's any way to take that into consideration.
It's a good point.
Yeah, in the polling, no, not really, because we
Obviously,
didn't ask
yeah.
it, right?
Yeah.
I think about that discussion as kind of a plan B, right? Because maybe we can investigate that sometime in the future, but I can't really offer you any insights on that because we didn't ask it.
No, and I get that. And you're only,
Well,
you know, you're only polling, you know, I assume
Right.
likely voters. So
It's a different electorate, as you point out. If I'm a wealthy person who's, you know, registered to vote in Los Angeles, but I have a house there, I'm not in our poll sample anyway.
Yep.
There is a way to do a survey of those folks through property, but we talked about this at the outset. It's much more complicated, costly to do the poll. I mean, we could go into all of this, but that's not sort of the way we chose to proceed. And again, I think the underlying assumption here is that, like, those folks might not mind, or that folks who are lower income might mind more. And I'll just say that's logical, but it isn't how people behave in a lot of the cases where we've actually seen empirical evidence.
Yeah, and I realize there's no way to get that data. I think that as we, think about the language that we're gonna, put in front of voters and as we talk to people, I think that is, and again, there's no way to get the data, but it is kind of an interesting situation because, you know, those biggest homeowners in a lot of cases are not voting here.
Yeah, true in Truckee too, true in a lot of communities that have significant, vacation home populations, if you will, where in almost all cases, there's a lot of second homes. And then obviously there's a population of year-round residents who are in very general terms, probably not as wealthy as the second home people. So it's a common problem.
And, I think the other thing to point out, and we had this discussion with Robin and Erica, we only see it through our lens, right? And I think that that's where there's value in kind of you pointing out what these results are relative to other places. So the fact that, they're polling only that relative voting population, these numbers are actually pretty darn high compared to most places. And I'll let Erica speak just on kind of how this compares to most other results that they see kind of across their polling.
Yeah, it's good. Again, there's three places you can be. You can be well above, which is what I would say you start in the first ask at, 75 plus maybe. And that's a great spot to be in. Obviously, it means you have to do less work between now and the election. It's pretty rare, but not unheard of. And then there's the converse, which is, anything below the low to mid 60s, we would discourage you from going forward, just because all tax measures do bleed a little bit, no matter how good a job you do with communications, no matter how good a job you do with an independent campaign. Usually, generally speaking, you bleed a couple points from where you start. So if you're starting if you're starting underwater under the 66 mark, it's really hard to get above. And then there's your situation, which is you are above, but it's narrow. And I absolutely think this is doable. And I think Ian concurs that this is doable. But it is not doable with no work. If we just go, okay, well, we're above, good enough. That's going to put us in great peril of what happened the last time, which is a very narrow failure.
So just for sake of reference, last time we asked for $98, right?
I believe it was 87, Robin.
87 with a
better than-
CPI, with a CPI every year, right?
With the CPI and no sunset. So this is what we proposed in the question was 98 with a CPI and a sunset.
And a sunset.
One of the considerations on that is our budget is actually, one of the worst economic situations for us is stagflation, because we will see
Right.
kind of 2% increases while our costs are going up. We've seen that in our apparatus. Chief Walker could tell you, I believe it's almost a $200,000 difference between
Sure.
our current water tender and the one if we bought it today, which is why if you look at our budget as a whole, it really makes sense to take the risk on the renewal, but get that inflation factor considered in, as opposed to the other way, which is no inflation factor, but have it never sunset.
Yep.
Yeah, and I had a question on the CPI as well, because I wondered, what you're seeing generally with polling, maybe you're doing in other communities is, this year it looks like the CPI is going to hold at around 3%, but last year it was what, like 9 or 10%. And just given the recent inflation, that's, I think, really top of mind for people. Are there any concerns about, I'm all for it. I want the CPI increase for the reasons the chief just said, but I just wondered how sensitive voters are to that given, recent inflation.
Yeah, it's a lingering challenge. In 2022, a lot of the clients we work with, we said, we don't know what the inflationary picture is going to look like for the year. And it is a challenge because people are looking at their pocketbooks and saying, not this year. A lot of our clients chose not to go in 2022 because of that. I think the big challenge here, and this is the challenge with every public entity, is being able to see the future far enough in advance. We just simply can't to know what it's going to feel like, 6, 7, 8 months from now on this question of inflation. It seems like the picture is brightening, right? It seems like it's going to feel less pressure, by 8 months from now. But there's no way to guarantee that. So that's what makes this a challenging decision. I do think if we're placing bets, I think it will improve, but there's simply no way to know that question answer.
Right. And the key thing here, which Ian knows all too well, is reality and public opinion don't track exactly. So, in fact, inflation has been going down, or at least, the rate of inflation has been going down for a year or two now. But people's perception of it lags a lot. Like people still are really feeling that hurt. And so the hope is if the factual trend continues, the sort of perception catches up by the time that we're needing it to. But again, none of us really control this.
And I would just add, we're probably getting a little bit into the next agenda item, but there's a couple things where we're trying to get things lined up in our favor so we don't end up with those 23 votes we missed last time. The one thing we can't control is microeconomics. It looks like inflation is going the right way, but there are a couple of things that are in our control. I reached out to other public organizations to make sure that we don't have competitors on the ballot as much as we can do that. The November 24th is statistically probably the most advantageous election that we will have in the next 4-year cycle. We also have the storm incidents that we have still in everybody's mind that will still hopefully be there of next November. So from a timing perspective, short of not being able to answer that macroeconomic question, we're attempting to line up everything we can to put this in our favor.
So Chief, just procedural, is there a decision to be made on this today?
Not on this. So on this,
Okay.
there's purely a presentation. If there's questions, you can send
Circle
those
back.
back to staff. I would say that, some of these we've had in smaller discussions. The goal is to get back with, Mayor Wentworth, or actually he's the former Mayor of Wentworth, offered to help. We were waiting on some
Sure.
of these results to start looking at this. And, ultimately, one of the things that we talked about the last few measures is, we don't quite know what the question should be. We've talked about, housing for firefighters is really important, but really how you phrase that. I mean, the reality is you have to get into the mind of the voter. The voter he cares about the firefighters. Don't get me wrong, but as Erica has taught me, the voter cares about themselves. And the reality is they care about the response time of the firefighters. Housing is tied to that. It's all tied together, but you have to make sure you bring the right measure. And I think that those are the little things that'll get us those, 23 votes if we can align it appropriately. So no, for this item, it's just presentation. There could be staff direction if you want us to research anything further. As we get to old business, there is a timeline and a consideration if we're going to move forward for the November election, and props and measures.
Board have any more questions? Okay. Why don't we go ahead and move on to the general public?
Thank you very
comment.
much.
We'll be
You're welcome.
back. Yeah, we'll be back under old business.
Yeah.
So if you've got any questions or you think about them, we'll go over them then. Is there any public comment? Anybody in the audience? Okay. Consent agenda, we don't have anything there. Chief Tolmeyer, will you take the budget?
I'll take budget. So I apologize. We didn't number them this time. And it looks like we accidentally had a couple just accounts that got mixed into the agenda packet. So the next item starts at operating budget variance. If you go past the presentation, past the accounts there, might just be mine actually. So is everybody on the operating budget variance, July 23 through June 24th?
Okay.
Okay. So we're at 6 out of 13 pay cycles at this point. So roughly about 46% from a payroll perspective. Again, recognizing a lot of our revenues are kind of on the back end and our costs tend to be a little bit slightly on the front end. We have not received our first apportionment, so we really don't have a good glide path of where exactly our revenue side is going to go. Most likely we'll see that within the next month. We tend to see that very late December or early January as far as income goes. I will note that, so if you look at it, this report got slightly changed. Bill was working on closing a couple things out. It shows the 244 for unsecured tax and shows a total of 367. What that includes is the ERAF redistribution on the back end that we received. So there was 122,000 we received. Generally, ERAF does that triple flip and we end up getting a small portion back, which is what accounts for that. Other than that, everything is essentially kind of in line with what we'd expected. I will note that filing and miscellaneous fees are down from last year, which is just relative to construction. Primarily, even though we're seeing a large number of permits being pulled, some of that is due to, minor reconstruction due to the winter emergency as opposed to large construction projects. There are still some larger projects moving forward, but not at the pace that we saw in the previous year. Any questions on the revenue side? One thing that we did start doing this year is adding grant revenue that's tied to personal operation costs on this side. Chief Rooks is working on the reimbursement of that. So there's always a lag there, unfortunately, but again, it goes back to that growing that pie and having things come in to help support that cost. So I still feel good about that portion being reimbursed. We were on the first quarter, we were a little low. We had most of our people working on training, so those were not grant reimbursable expenses. But once we got into kind of that chipping and defensible fuels work, those will be reimbursed. So we should start to see those materialize in the budgets in the next few months. Moving down to personnel costs, again, we should be sitting roughly around 46%. Couple things to note here. So some of these are, again, just kind of front end heavy. One area that we're low is full-time firefighter costs. That's because we had a couple of firefighters that left the district early on. So we were at, I believe, 3 at the beginning of the year, but we're down to 2 full-time currently. We just did a hiring that I'll speak to later in the process, but that number should start to come up. We've seen an increase in the part-time, and that's been deliberate for a whole bunch of reasons. One is, while we had that gap there, we had people covering that on a part-time basis. We've also hit training really heavy. So we've done quite a few classes this year, including crew boss, engine boss, 212, which is a SAW class, ICS 300. So recognizing that we have a part-time staff, it's your biggest strength is also your biggest weakness. So we're making sure that we're keeping them properly trained and putting that time in. And the other part of it is we've added what we're calling a Fix It Friday program, where Fridays we basically had Captain Kaler here by himself. He has 4 of our summer newer firefighters, and it's this great kind of almost like intern opportunity where they come in and work on projects for us. They're available for response. I see that being a position that has turnover time, but it's actually one of the first spots that I started in on the fire district. And it gets us that capacity both for calls and just getting work done. So I think Scott's appreciated having some of that support on Fridays. So that's the majority of why those costs are up. We also had some of the wildline costs originally tied into the part-time category. We're working on fixing that out. And then the wildland program, as you remember, is basically kind of April, May through October. So we see a larger portion of that kind of in the summer, fall season. There's going to be a drop off there, and then it'll pick back up again in the spring. Moving down through here. Nothing too significant. Everything's kind of coming in where we'd expect it as far as insurance and workers' comp after the significant increases we saw over the last few years. Any questions on the personnel side? So moving down to administrative, seeing some areas here that we had some expected costs. I think one thing to kind of be aware of, and my goal long-term is I'm starting to kind of parse out the budget. So we have our capital expenditures, we have our general fund that has a fund balance, and then we have, potentially other funds that are tied to special causes. So we don't just have a lump sum of money. I think that's important for both good district finances as well as that transparency and people understanding what we're doing with our funding. That said, we have to be comfortable with the fact that we have to take advantage of opportunities and have mechanisms set aside to do that appropriately. If you remember, I pulled the diff out and put it into our capital expenditures because that's ultimately where it belongs. We used to use that diff to take care of opportunities that came up. The reality is, there is a cost both from a time perspective and from a resource and support perspective for something like a ballot measure. So our miscellaneous consulting represents a whole bunch of things. It represents some of the work on the cell tower, which obviously long-term needs to happen. It represents a payment back for my hiring this year that was contractually owed to the agency that you sent out to do that work. And we're putting some funding towards make sure we do the measure appropriately. So I do foresee that, miscellaneous consulting is going to be high. Again, it's not something that I'm concerned about with our budget. I think we budgeted appropriately for where we need to be. Other than that, the categories are all right where they should be. Liability insurance keeps going up, slightly quicker than inflation. The reality is, at some point, we may look into self-insuring on our buildings and those types of options. We just don't have the administrative kind of staff capacity to leverage some of those things right now. But overall, we're in decent shape there, even though it's high. Moving into logistics, this category is relatively where we'd expect it to be, recognizing we've done a lot of that work on the front end. Chief Walker's going to talk about, we did quite a bit of work on our facilities this year, so he'll get you caught up on that, but kind of glide path for where we'd expect that to be. On the prevention side, again, we're a little lower on our costs just because we have not had as many requests for permits and that sort of thing. So that balances out. Training, the costs aren't high there. Again, they're not reflected in that budget as much as they are in a staff personnel cost. A lot of that derives from the fact that we've done a lot of in-house training. We've had Cal OES come in and do training that they provided for free for us. So no training's free. There's a cost to have employees take it, but we've been able to, keep that kind of where we want it to be. And utilities, I'm actually relatively happy because those have been about 20, 30% over for the last few years. So it's possible we're trying to hit some sort of plateau there. Depending on where we end up with our first apportionment, one recommendation I'd have to the board is we've looked at, historically, we've been putting about 225, 250 in our replacement fund transfer. I'd like to see that closer to about 10% of our budget. So if we see that next apportionment coming well, we'd want to put more towards that capital replacement fund when we get an opportunity. Any questions on the budget as a whole? So Chair Curry, if there's no budget questions, that would move us to 7A in old business.
Yeah.
So 7A is a proposal of timeline for November 2024 potential partial tax measure and consideration to enter into phases 2 and 3 with props and measures. As the board recalls, when we initially looked into whether or not we wanted to do a ballot measure, we wanted to kind of give ourselves a little insurance, right? So we didn't feel like we had to make the full commitment on moving forward in November. And the intent was we split the agreement with props and measures into 2 pieces, did some homework and gave ourselves some time to decide, do we want to move forward? I think, there is a point at which you do have to decide whether you're moving forward on this or not. There are some economics that might play a last minute decision, but ultimately at this point, we kind of have to ante up or decide if we're not going to move forward. So I will let Erica and Robin speak on the timeline if they're available.
Robin, you're on mute.
Yep, thank you. I'm on mute. I'm happy to walk through the timeline. We can either scroll further in the agenda that's posted and I can work from there. And as Chief explained to you, the next step, now that we have gone through the polling exercise and of information on where the community stands, you're not at the trigger point to say, yes, we're placing a measure on the ballot. That doesn't happen, or the deadline for that to submit a resolution to the county is not until August. But there's work to be done between now and then. And this is a planning and sort of communication timeline to help you get to that August deadline. So here we are, December 12th at this special board meeting where we've reviewed the polling details, and based on direction from the board, the next steps would be as follows. We would, props and measures, Eric and I, take the polling information as well as the details we have from our communications with the chief to create talking points, frequently asked questions, basically a variety of information messaging, fact sheets, infographic, some social media, and content for the district website, and as well as create a PowerPoint presentation for public meetings. And we would work with Chief and his staff to identify, internal stakeholders and those first group of individuals, key individuals that we want to make sure understand the needs, understand the story and the game plan to move forward. This is intended to occur, in December, January, based on direction from the board. After the first of the year and in February, March, we talk about working with those internal stakeholders, extending that outreach to external stakeholders, and we would craft and propose to send our first informational mailer. That informational mailer wouldn't be sent until after the March primary election, as certainly there are some things on the ballot in your community, and we want to alleviate any opportunity for confusion. First mailer would identify the needs of the fire protection district, would offer opportunity for the community to provide feedback, to send in a tear-off mailer. We would have a parallel online survey available. Again, seeking input from the community while providing information. Then we would, again, push to or encourage that external stakeholder outreach. And as we get further into spring, collect the feedback from that priorities mailer and really assess what's the readiness of your community for a November election or a November campaign. We will work with your legal counsel and staff to draft resolution, the tax rate and ballot question. If the community feedback from the outreach meetings and survey participation shows a decline in support, really if some red flags come up as we do this outreach, or we would consider working with EMC Research to draft and refine a tracking poll. But if everything is on track with what and aligns with what we've heard from this initial poll, we would continue moving on without needing to do that tracking survey. In early May, we would develop a second informational mailer identifying and sharing the results from our outreach, both in, whether that's town hall meetings, whether that's through the online survey, and share results and information that we've gotten from those outreach methodologies, and send another mailer, and then really refine the ballot resolution for submitting to the board, as well as then for approval and moving forward to put it on the ballot. And again, here, this June, July, August, we know that different boards have different timings for summer month meetings. And so depending on how we roll out, if we need to do a tracking survey or not, we're looking at June or July to pass a resolution to move forward and place a measure on the ballot. And again, I just have those dates there for your deadlines, for making sure that we're understanding that everything must be done by August 9th. And at that point, the district, the fire protection district would let go, if you will, and the measure and the efforts would need to be moved on to an independent advocacy campaign to talk about the persuasion efforts for passing the measure. Questions on the timeline?
And I guess I would also add, I respectfully to Robin, this is kind of a go, no go for us in the sense that there's already a financial commitment that we're aware of. It's not small, as Roger would point out, but there's also a significant time commitment. There's a limited opportunity to make sure, speaking with Mayor Wentworth, the messaging has to be on point and people have to understand what we're trying to do over the period of the next 10 months. So yes, there may be things outside of our control that may alter our path when we get to August, but the reality is we need to have a full commitment to move forward or decide that we want to, pursue this at another point in the district's future. But ultimately, I would believe that this is our best opportunity if we're going to take one. So
Totally agree.
Question I have is what are we looking at in costs to go
Sure.
these
So
final two?
the second piece of that agreement includes the work that we've looked at with props and measures. Again, we split it out into the costs being separated so we could do the first half.
Are you at exhibit 1 after the contract?
Yeah, it's exhibit 1, it's page 10 of the agreement. So the consulting fees are essentially 5,000 a month. Those are a hard cost. We could look at changing things like mailers and advertising based on the situation, but I think this is a, rough approximate estimate of what the costs would be.
It's 5,500 a month, but yes.
Sorry.
Yeah, I just obviously close enough, but yeah, on the last page of the contract document, that's in the packet, right, Chief?
Correct. If
Yes.
yep.
Okay. The last page of the contract document has kind of a suggested budget here. It's not as Chief said, in terms of the actual paid outreach to the community, that's sort of negotiable as we go forward. We can kind of see how we're doing. But this is the budget that we would recommend as kind of a baseline budget for talking with folks. Be 3 mailers over the next 10 months. And then one kind of tranche of digital advertising to accompany those mailers.
I'd also point out that knowing our community, we've had the same discussion with the association. I believe we have incredible value and opportunity in a grassroots campaign. We know the people of our community. We're a community of about 8,000 people. If we put that commitment to this, that's going to hold significant weight, even compared to mailers and social media and that sort of thing. So there's obviously a room and need for all sorts of different pieces to this. But again, I would not rule out the value of people putting in kind of that grassroots efforts.
Oh, 100%. You can't do it without that. I mean, that's critical. But the two things kind of work hand in hand with each other.
I just have a couple of questions, and one, and I totally agree on the grassroots side. And yes, we're a community of 8,000 people, but we're nowhere near 8,000 likely voters. So I think there's a lot of opportunity for phone banking and knocking on doors and hanging out at Vaughn's. So I definitely think we'll do all those. I mean, this is kind of a question for Caroline. I'm just kind of curious about how much traffic do we get on the on our website, and how many followers do we have on social?
Varies based on whether it's an actual incident versus whether it's informational, which I'm sure the town has the same thing.
Makes sense.
If we show photos and put a brief description of our employees going out actually fighting fire and have a picture of Tyson, we certainly get a lot more feedback and positive feedback from the public. We don't have a ton of followers. I think we've only got 5,000 on each, which is pretty low.
That tracks with the town now.
When our emergencies, we were, as you probably know, I was tied up doing dispatching duties and things here, so we were reposting the town's post, which doesn't give us a lot of feedback. They know the town posted it first. They're looking for something specifically from us.
And a couple of notes. So unfortunately, we lost Danny Shugard, who was managing the website. I managed it before him, but it was under a different platform. We did get quite large hits on that, but it was, like Caroline mentioned, when there's a fire in, then they would look at that and they'd go through those. Ultimately, Facebook and, we pick things up there. But again, there would be opportunities to where we have 50 firefighters on staff. I'm guessing half of them aren't even registered to vote. So there are opportunities here, and they're all on Instagram or Facebook. So once we get them reposting, sharing, using that, I think that's going to help quite a bit.
Yeah.
And I just want to jump in and clarify kind of the difference here, because there's what we call organic social media, which is all of what you're talking about, right? Your existing pages, who your existing people can repost to, and sort of quote unquote viral stuff like that. The digital advertising is totally separate from that. We target actual voters. And by the way, one little upside is it does help drive people to your pages. It will drive people to your web page, and it can also help drive people to your Facebook page. So you could end up at the end of this with more engagement on those pages, but the digital advertising doesn't rely at all on like who follows you or who you have right now. It's completely separate from that.
Yeah, and I know there's great ways to geofence that and everything else.
We
And
don't even geofence it. We literally target people as individual voters.
cool. And then my next question is actually for you guys. So on these, these tear-off surveys and the online surveys, what kind of a response rate do you guys typically see on those? Are a lot of people tearing those off and sending them back in or engaging online?
Robin, you want to take that one?
Sure, they do. They like the opportunity to have a voice. And it allows them to feel heard. And whether they mail them in or in a community like yours, we see a lot of people just will drop them off, right? We'll have them, the direction will be to drop off at the local fire department. And they like to be considered. They feel that they're included. The other piece with that, you have a community of 8,000, and yet only the registered voters were included in the outreach for polling. And so this will reach those who are not registered voters. And again, it just brings the community along, right? It increases the communication around the need. We find it can also flush out any red flags that maybe we're not aware of, and perhaps even that you're not aware of.
Thanks. It's really helpful.
Yeah, just one thing on that. People do tend to respond in the medium that that the outreach comes in. They don't cross mediums as much. So what that means is, like, if you send a mail piece and say, go online to this website to give us your opinion, that's not as successful as the number of replies we get from the tear off on the mail. If we want people to answer the survey online, we would do that through the digital advertising. We would send a digital ad that says, click here to tell us your opinion. And then it just goes straight into the survey. So it's harder to get people to like cross modes, but people are pretty good at responding within a certain mode.
Thanks.
Chief, as you well know, I'm really opposed to this kind of approach in that, but we have come so far on it, and I agree with you. I don't want to see us, whatever it takes to get this through. And I think we'd be remiss if we didn't go ahead and complete this and give us every opportunity to be successful with this campaign.
I agree.
Yeah, no, thank you. And I appreciate that. And I see this as a two-pronged commitment. It's a commitment to the contractual side, but it's also a commitment to staff time to make sure this is going to be a strategic priority for us.
Agree. Do you need a motion?
We do need a motion, correct?
So I'd move that we take the next step, as Commissioner Curry mentioned, to finish the work and put the proposal, resulting in a proposal on the November ballot.
I'll second.
And that would include, just to be sure, the agreement with props and measures.
Oh,
for
yes,
phases
I'm sorry.
2 and 3.
Yes. What you,
So,
And Michael,
so-
you can-
yeah, just to clarify, so we need a motion to approve the agreement.
okay. So I will revise my motion to approve the agreement.
And I'll amend my second.
You ready for a vote? Commissioner Bulkley, how do you vote?
I have to move forward.
Chair Curry, how do you vote?
Aye.
Commissioner Mandel, how do you vote?
Yes.
And Commissioner Truax, how do you vote?
Yes.
All right, this motion carries 4-0.
so
So that moves us on to B, consideration of appointing David Easterly, fill the current district board vacancy. Commissioner Truax.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, so as previously mentioned, when we knew that we had at least one vacancy with another one pending, former Commissioner Beeler and I interviewed 4 individuals. One of those individuals subsequently withdrew from the process, but former Commissioner Beeler and I really had consensus on now Commissioner Bulkley's appointment. And then, definitely we knew that we would have another slot opening up with Commissioner Beeler's resignation. So we also both really concurred, and I know that Mr. Easterby has agreed to serve. So we would like to formally nominate him to join the board. Any questions?
Need a motion?
We do need a motion, so there would have to be a motion to appoint Dave Easterby to fill the current board vacancy.
I'd make a motion that we appoint Dave Easterby to the current vacant board position.
A second.
All right, Commissioner Bulkley, how do you vote?
Yes.
Chair Curry, how do you vote?
Aye.
Commissioner Mandel, how do you vote?
Yes.
Commissioner Truax, how do you vote?
Yes.
All right, this motion carries 4-0.
So, so I'll defer to legal at this point. but ladies and gentlemen,
Drinks are on you.
I believe at this point you can join us. So, and I'll defer to legal, but I believe at this point you can now vote on any upcoming agenda items at this, as you are officially appointed. So not sure if you want to move over to the other seat or.
Okay, moving on to new business. Consideration of resolution 2023-07, resolution of the Mammoth Lakes Fire Protection District recognizing the contributions of Commissioner Brett Bueller. Chief Tolmeyer.
Yeah, so this one was a little tough. He said Commissioner Beeler's been in town since 82, 83, like he mentioned on last big storm. I've been with the district 20 something years. He was there long before that. He started in the ranks of firefighter, moved up through all the way to the board to provide us with guidance. He's led us well, and now he's moving on to new adventures. We obviously wanted to memorialize his service in a resolution. So, I would bring it to the board for discussion and then ask that we actually read the full resolution and have a vote on it.
Okay. Brett has really left his mark on the department here. As a firefighter, a captain, a training officer, commissioner. I never was part of the Mammoth Lakes Fire Department, except through being a commissioner. But I learned so much from Brett, and he was somebody to look up to. He kind of led us through a lot of stuff, and he was very precise in his analysis of whatever the situation was, and the way we should go on things. And so, though I was never part of the department, I consider myself a Beeler trained man, and congratulations to him. It's a bittersweet thing. Like to see the honor that he's given, but hate to see him go. Anybody else?
Just thank you for your commitment over time, all these years, for your passion, and for caring as much about you do at Mammoth Lakes Fire Protection District as you do. Thank you. We'll miss you.
Yeah. Thanks so much for all your service, Brett. I learned a lot from you in the brief time that we knew each other. And yeah, there's definitely some big shoes to fill on the commission, but we'll miss you very much, but hope that you'll be a frequent visitor.
Well, thanks to the board. Appreciate it.
Brett goes without saying. Thank you. You'll be getting calls from me.
Yeah.
Oh, I can read it. Everybody loves reading. So resolution number 2023-07, a resolution of the Board of Commissioners for the Mammoth Lakes Fire Protection District recognizing the contributions of Commissioner Brett Beeler. Whereas Commissioner Brett Beeler began serving on the Mammoth Lakes Fire Protection District Board of Fire Commissioners in 2014, and whereas Commissioner Beeler's years of experience working as a firefighter, engineer, and captain for the district prior to serving on the board added to his well-rounded perspective and decision-making as a fire commissioner. And whereas Brett Beeler worked tirelessly as a steward of district finances, provided oversight of the district fleet and facilities, and safeguarded the community of Mammoth Lakes. And whereas Commissioner Beeler has always been mindful of interests of the district and consistently endeavored to support district personnel and operations. And whereas Commissioner Beeler has provided outstanding leadership to the Board of Fire Commissioners, Now therefore be it resolved by the Board of Commissioners of the Mammoth Lakes Fire Protection District that the Mammoth Lakes Fire Protection District Board of Fire Commissioners honors and recognizes through this resolution the extensive contributions of Commissioner Beeler and enacts Resolution 2023-07 immediately upon adoption.
Do I have motion to,
I move to approve resolution number 2023-07.
I would second.
Commissioner Buckley, how do you vote?
Yes.
Chair Curry, how do you vote?
aye,
Commissioner Mandel, how do you vote?
Yes.
And Commissioner Truax, how do you vote?
Yes.
Motion carries 4-0.
Commissioner.
Commissioner Easterby gets to vote now.
Oh, yeah.
Commissioner Easterby.
Yes.
Carries 5. Brett, this is for you. Realize I need to get the 5. We assumed it would pass.
thank you for it.
It's been a pleasure.
Let's move on to C, consideration to enter into services agreement.
So,
Did I miss one?
yeah, we're actually at B.
B, I'm sorry, consideration request for fee deferral of development impact fees associated with the Mammoth Hotel project by Drew Hill, Highmark Development. Chief?
Yep, so I'll just provide a little background and then Drew, if you want to grab, you can grab the pedestal. We'll make sure the mic's working for you.
Congratulations,
So-
Steve.
Mr. Hill approached me a few months ago, actually. If you're not aware of the project, he can give you a little background on that. But he has worked with the town to have his fees deferred from the town side as well as from the housing side to a later date. And he's asking the same thing of the district. So I'll let him give his presentation and kind of go from there.
Okay,
Have you had an opportunity to read his letter or?
Mhm.
So let me take one moment and sometimes physical pictures of evidence. So I printed 2 of these out for you to pass around. Feel free to look at it. I don't know how much the board knows about the project or not, so short answer is I'm here to ask for some consideration. But the longer answer is I want to give you a little background on who we are.
I have looked at this already, so.
This development's gonna embrace the community, I think, more than most hospitality will, and I want to go into that for just a second. And I'll go into the details of the request letter, but I think everybody here knows what serious it's been like. I don't know, the fixture in the community, some might say an eyesore. I kind of saw it as we can make something better out of it. And in 2018, myself and a group of people bought the building. And we went on a path that was pre-pandemic for a while and designed a hotel. So the building is about 100,000 square feet. It's 3 stories tall, 1980s vintage. So architecture in there, I won't call it the best in the world, but it's a full sprinkler building. That's the project that we had. Before I go into too much, though, I'll stop for 1 second, because I want to take the opportunity to thank Chief Tromaya. And I couldn't help but listen to your discussion about voting that's coming up, you're asking. And, you know, the people that I know when I talk to are the amount of gratitude from going through this last winter and see all the things in the calls that the department has responded to today. There's just a lot more positive attitude towards the fire department than a couple of years ago, because now when bad things happen, these guys show up. And it's more real now than maybe it was a few years ago when they just go, oh, this is just another tax. And that's the thing. I just wanted to, this is a great forum to say thank you. Because we had roof collapses in our building, we had firemen with the break, and they were there every time and really worked with us. So I'm gonna, in front of the board, thank this team right up. Basically what we did is we went to the town and got this an approval to renovate the building, so from the ground up, we're keeping the same building, so in a garage. And the whole background behind this, I'm pretty much a local, I grew up skiing here. And, I think, and when I got this idea, I thought that the best part of Mammoth Lakes are the people that are here, all the adventurers that are in these communities, and being able to connect with visitors. And the way I look at this hotel is it's not a destination like most hotels would say, come to our destination. This is the beginning of your journey. The real journey is going on the Mammoth Wilds that all around us, all the amazing people and friendly out with this business. So this is basically an adventure hotel. Our branding is called the Karen. So if you think it's a little shack of stones in front of all the girls, what are those things by? Basically, by like you're on the right path, and this will help you go in the right path. So we're really trying to embrace, and we have a lot of, we need this hotel to embrace the local, because I think that's how you use these successful with the business. Because I think the community is our best sale. So I'm very positive on that. So basically, we got it approved by the town in 2019, and everything was just because of COVID. They put it on the shelf. Back in 2021, we resurrected it. It's designed by Ginsler, a very famous architect. And we started going back into financing the property and going for our building permits. In early January of this year, we put in a formal application called car shell and demo permits to go ahead and go the project. And we were delayed a bit by our financing construction loan. I'll talk a little bit about that. But essentially, the town gave us until December 31st on our application, or our application expires. So we've been working hard to meet that December 31st deadline, which I'm happy to report we should be in a good place to go ahead and do that. The biggest problem we're having now that we secure a construction loan and we're putting in equity partners and actually make the project be a reality is the town wants us to support those now. And your fees are due in issuance of that loan. So the consideration I'm asking for is not any reduction for it at all, is just allow me to delay them and match what the town employees have done, give you a quick turnaround with that. So we approached the town with the same kind of problem, the gap financing of now until our construction loans and our equity finances. I mean, if I had to guess, we're probably gonna start April, May-ish, start construction depending on how many winter we have. So, but if I have to pull right now, I have to pay all those permit fees. And what the town's done is they say, okay, we realize this is a hardship on you, and we will let you pay those fees in 2 installments. The first installment being our first framing inspection, which basically in layman's terms means we do our demo, we get to a point, we start doing some of the framing, and that first inspection, we would have to pay 50%. So if I had to guess, say we start in April, that's like you're gonna get the first half in like June. Then the second half would be a certificate of occupancy. We would pay the final payment. And that would be after all the inspections are done and everything before we actually operate the hotel. The construction time right now is planned for around 24 months. So if we start in April, 2 years from April, we should be able to open the hotel. So what I'm, hopefully asking the board to consider is matching up with the town manager in a schedule, which will allow the right building permit and try and keep in, and it helps with that, the cash flow, because my construction ones are not gonna fund for April. So that's never kind of the level of the issue or the question that I'm asking. And if there's questions about the hotel or anything, answer things that you might.
So if I may, before we have questions, I'll just comment on it a little bit, because I think there's a whole bunch of factors that you should be considering in your decision making. Can we go to, let's go. So as Mr. Hill was saying, so this is essentially where they're sitting currently. I'm not sure if you can read that. It's in your packet as well. But they basically went to 2 proposals to the town. What you see on the left there is the total fees that are due to the project. Generally at fee submittal, be about 1.15 million. We're basically at that point of fees due at permit issuance, which, as he's mentioned, his timeline is the end of the month here. This is as it currently stands today, with basically the town fees as well as the housing fees being pushed to those two new deadlines of which would separate out those costs. Couple things here, this issue's come up before the district in the past. He did mention kind of an important differentiation. The board did look at potentially lowering or waiving dip fees, so slightly different situation. But there was concerns as far as protecting the dip fees and the schedule as a whole. We had Brent Richardson give comments on that. He's not available today, but we do have Michael, one of the partners that could speak on it. And there was just some concerns with the town. They have in their resolution an actual process for changing their dip fees situation by situation. We do not have that written into our dip fees. Legal can probably speak most to the implications on that, but think about, is this going to have any implications down the line? I will note that we're looking at redoing our diff schedule and a new resolution. We've been working through that process on a study with the town, and I'm hoping to have that before you next year. I would recommend that we certainly have language for whatever the board would like to do written in there, so we don't put ourselves in situations that might be a little tougher. I'll also voice that, my ultimate long-term goal is I would love to see the current building gone. We did have quite a few significant propane leaks. There are some structural collapses, and I just want to see economic move forward. So I'd probably defer to legal to see if there's, what considerations they have. But I believe that paints kind of the bigger picture, especially to the portions of the board that were around when we had these earlier discussions. I did, after those board meetings, reach out because last time when we were considering waiving dip fees, there was mention of the fact that the library had waived some fees. Speaking with their administrator, their board has decided they're not waiving any more fees in the future. So that's their position. I did ask Mr. Hill to reach out to the water district. I believe they're working through some accommodations there.
I know the exact same thing. And one of the things I want to point out, we're not asking for any discount, waiver, nothing. All we're asking for is some scheduling to allow our funding to line up with the cash flow demands of payment opportunities. So we should have construction when the funds like in April, so we should be in a position to start making payments on all the different areas. So this is not any kind of reduction or anything like that. This is full payment. It's just asking some flexibility for the schedule. Yes.
Drew, Davy Street, is it scheduled in a timeline for, well, is it part of your commercial funding, your loan spending?
So
would
let
cover
me
this?
explain maybe some background on my funding so you can understand a little process that I'm kind of ship I have to row on my side. So essentially, we can fund the projects. We are financing about 75%. So I right now have a commitment for 75% construction loan that's ready to fund. They need a couple of things to happen for a loan like that to happen. One is we need to get gross management price bids from contractors because essentially they're going through a loan size. So it's 75% of what? Is it 95 million or is it 105 million? So the lender will not fund until that kind of operation is done. That's a 2 to 3 month thing, and we're starting it right now. So hopefully in like February, I'll have those bids, and then I can go to the lender and say, okay, there's a situation, here's the loan size. The equity side is tied to the loan side because the gap in financing that our equity partners are going to put up is tied to what is that missing amount of money that you're asking us to give you. If you're going 75% and my partners have, about 15% of that money. So we're looking at about 10 to 15% left. So what is that 10 to 15%? Is it 15 million? Is it 10 million? Is it 20 million? That has to be sized because what happens, there's a couple of things. When you do a big construction project like this, the lender's going to want to know if prices go up or there's a problem, who's standing up for the construction and possibilities. So that number is a very definite number, it goes into detailed big contracts. And it just takes a process of 4 to 5 months to vet all of that stuff out. So if I'm gonna try and start sometime in the month of April, assuming everything goes well, those are the things that have to get done. Let me fast track back to December 31st. In between that gap, it's essentially, Sears Center is owned by just a group of guys like me. We bought this building with a vision, all are passionate for mammoth and what's going on, and we don't have unlimited resources. We're really counting on the construction lender and the second equity loan to come in, but they won't do it until we do these things. So we're kind of between a rock and a hard place. And if the board would consider giving us some flexibility, it would really help us make this project go. Give you a good answer.
That's a good answer. Thank you. Appreciate that.
And I would just ask,
Chief?
Yep.
So I just want to clarify before we, going back to the, I'm sorry, I'm getting feedback, so I don't know if you're hearing me okay, but going back to the appointment, we do need to administer an oath before there actually could be on the board.
Oh,
So.
Oh,
I think he's talking about you.
I state your name.
Oh,
In your thoughts.
what does he need from me?
we could do an oath of office.
we have to do an oath of office before.
If you have it on, if you pull it up, we can do that real quick.
Yeah, I stand.
And then, Michael, we'd obviously,
You're right.
Yeah. Chief, I have a question for you on the last ordinance that we passed for this very thing. I think it was pretty implicit that we didn't give any consideration on the diff payments on there. And Mr. Hill, you have listened to what's been going on here. We're in need of money. Our budget is, it just doesn't cut it for what we are required to do here in town. And our staffing and that is not even at a bare minimum. And so for myself, I appreciate the situation that you're in. But I think if we start now negotiating on what we just passed and give special consideration to you, it just opens the door for anybody else that comes in here and wants to do a project. And
Chair Curry, I guess I would ask, we can get Dave Easter to be official.
oh, we do have to do this now?
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Right in the middle of.
Okay.
You just keep hanging out on the dais.
Supposed to have legal give some insight as far as precedent setting and that sort of thing. So
Sure.
really to understand what the weight of this decision is, kind of what our options are.
And I think, Michael, you're all can correct me, but I think we need the appointment in lieu of election and the oath of office, the combined form. Is that correct, Michael?
You think we never did this before.
Right. So
So do you want me to do the appointment and you do the oath?
sure, if you do the oath, because I know what that is. and- So raise your right hand. I, Dave Easterby,
I, Dave Easterby,
do solemnly swear or affirm
do solemnly swear or affirm
that I will support and defend the Constitution of the United States
that I will support and defend the Constitution of the United States
and the Constitution of the State of California
and the Constitution of the State of California
against all enemies, foreign and domestic,
against all enemies, foreign and domestic,
that I will bear true faith and allegiance to the Constitution of the United States
and that I will bear truth, faith, and allegiance to the Constitution of the United States
and the Constitution of the State of California.
and the Constitution of the State of California,
That I take this obligation freely without any mental reservation
that I take this obligation freely without any mental reservation
or purpose of evasion.
or purpose of evasion,
And that I will well and faithfully
and that I will well and fully
discharge the duties upon which I am to enter.
faithfully discharge the duties upon which I am about to enter.
Congratulations, Lord.
And the appointment, actually, I'm wrong, the appointment is actually the county appointment, I'll say send in the.
So I think the appointment was what the board did.
Right.
Okay.
Now you can sit.
Welcome.
Now it's.
Yeah.
Now your vote's
My
legit.
microphone.
Michael, as far as I understand, there was just the intent, are you comfortable with that?
I can't hear you, Chief.
Remember? So, and then, before I answer Roger's question, are there any considerations we should be taking from kind of a legal precedent setting perspective?
So I think as we talked about before, we probably, if we're gonna have deferrals, we should probably revise our resolutions or at least bring back something for board consideration on the ability to defer them and then what that's gonna look like. So for like most of them, you'll see that in the municipal codes, you'll see it in the resolutions. And then there'll be a, you know, how they're deferred. And so I think if the board wants to entertain that, I think that's something that we should probably bring back to the board.
So yeah, I believe we have ultimately a couple different directions the board could go with this. The board could decide that they do not want to move forward with the option. The board could decide that they need something in writing, in which case I believe we're held to the December 31st timeline. That, and you know, Michael could comment on if we would need to actually have a meeting to do that, or if we could just provide staff direction on something to look at considerations. And if you did decide to give considerations, you know, what exactly would those be? Would you hold to the ones that the town did or do something different? So, again, kind of weighing past history and deciding what makes the most sense. I will acknowledge that this one is different from what we've looked at before. Ultimately, you know, it would be good to get that project moving forward, but there could be implications, you know, future decisions for the board.
Anybody questions?
If there was some form of writing, would you be available? I mean, do you have that kind of started or what that would look like if you had something in writing they needed to present?
Well, there's, you know, the memo, the town did it, and I don't know about your ordinance, so that's like a level of legality and I'm already confident.
And me and I.
The memo that the town wrote was it was project specific and very like to the point, and one page. And Dan Holler signed off on it and their package was done that way. One of the things I would say, a concern about, are we setting a precedent, everybody in the road is gonna be in there. On the way our project was handled, because we did a couple of things. Most of the code, town of Mammoth Lakes, is set up to handle homes. It is not set up to handle large scale commercial projects. And there's a good reason for that, because we have lots of houses and not very many big commercial projects. And so, like, when they did our fees, the way the fees were calculated and what the town charges to process our fees, they had what they call large project provision. Now, if it's anything over $10 million, they treat it differently than any project that was like a home or a smaller project. So that was one way they differentiate. I think the thing that I would say is this would help us a lot. This project is, we don't make our December 31st thing. It's financial difficulties that we would be in. And it also would mean we might have to reapply. We can't pay for all the grants involved in it. That could put a severe cost increase in the project because our code cycle is based on 2019. And if we had to reapply, we're our code cycle gets escalated in the code. And I think everyone knows that the code is much more expensive and has a lot of stuff in it that we prefer to not be under it. Right, so we're kind of getting squeezed by code cycle, we're getting squeezed by kind of this 1 year final determination by the town, and that's what our application goes.
Yeah, I understand that you're under the gun, so to speak. That'll come up quickly, that December 31st date. Have we and so I'm kind of new here. Have we just had time to discuss this as a
So-
group? And the second part is, do we have a way of protecting ourselves if, God forbid, something doesn't go all the way through? And then it's an uncompleted thing and we don't have a definition.
I believe if someone pays fees and goes there, the whole building, doesn't actually build it, I think fees are in front of it. Most jurisdictions, that's the way it is. If you pay fees for a permit, then you, and I would ask your legal counsel to comment on this, but I think it's common practice, is if you pay building permit fees and you never build, those fees.
So a couple things, and unfortunately, we are operating kind of outside the realm of having everything written out, right? So
Right.
if you look at what's ideal is exactly what you see with what the town did. I'm looking specifically at the January 13, 2023 building permit. And their resolution was set up in a way that it reads exactly there. Unless a town approves a different payment fee schedule in writing for a specific project. Currently, our resolution doesn't have any such language, so we're going kind of outside of anything written down. That being said, you are the board. I can't speak as far as refundability of fees. That's something we have to look into. And I don't know if Mike will be ready to answer on that as well. But ultimately, if you decided to move forward, we'd be moving kind of outside of the resolution. The implications are that might open some things, but you have to weigh that against, where you believe this would it put us in a better situation? Ultimately, I'd love to see this project funded. I don't know if this is going to move the needle on it. The reality is, 2/3 of the fees have been funded. Some of the other ones most likely will not get pulled at that initial point. I'm not sure if Mr. Hill would look at some sort of compromise. It would help him if he did some due at this month or at the point of permit, some due at a defined point in the future. Yeah, I'm not.
Yeah, but what we first clarify, my comment about flexibility, is that available kind of many jurisdictions, I know departments in other cities in Southern California. It's just kind of, that's kind of how, but I don't, I'm guessing, they may not be flexible, I have no idea. In terms of payment schedule, that current, like, if we have to ask you for permit in 730, I'd be much more comfortable saying, I'll pay you the whole 240 at first framing than having to pay something right now. And I'll give you one of the reasons is Chief Trollmeyer knows we had a major fail on our roof. And if you walk over and look up on Meridian, you'll see the skylight through the old Ronald County offices because we got a big giant hole in the roof where having to replace the bottom of the joist. That extra expense is really put a burden on the partnership. So that's why it's imminent right now. It's more important to us if you can find a way to address this situation without, maybe opening floodgates or something like that.
When do you expect first frame?
My guess is they start in April, first training, probably a couple of months after that. It's about June.
So maybe the opportunity is to take this offline, have a discussion, make sure we don't conflict with, like, my understanding is the policy of town permits them to make that. Ours does not currently, correct?
Ours is silent, essentially. I don't,
Okay.
and again, I know that Brent had
Okay.
some strong thoughts on that. I don't want to put Michael in a decision on this because he is filling in today. If we decided we want to table this, I would want a little bit of board direction kind of based off what we find out where we're going to go. So I don't waste your time over the holidays. I would assume we'd have to have at least a meeting where we would need 3 of you or a quorum to move that forward based off kind of what our findings were. And a lot of it would depend on, where you want to go with it. So I don't mind taking this offline. I'm not sure if that would be something you'd be comfortable with.
Yeah, I'm fine with that. I'll run the holidays, whatever.
In order to approve something like this, we'd have to pass a resolution
It wouldn't be a resolution, but because, and again, Michael can correct me. I'm not comfortable writing a memo because it would be outside of our current resolution, so there would have to be board action to approve a variance on our resolution.
Right.
Which would require a 2/3 majority of the quorum. Michael, you can speak up if I'm wrong on any of that.
Yeah, I think the recommendation at this point would be to, if the board's direction is just to look into the deferral, to look into whether we would amend our resolution or whether we can adopt something that sets forth the deferrals. Like again, we took it to the town, they have the specific provisions. And whether we would adopt something similar to that allows us to vary from and defer the fees and then bring that back to the board at a subsequent meeting with options for the board's consideration. That would be the recommendation at this point.
Could we do that, unanimous written consent? Or does it have to be a full meeting?
It would have to be a meet. At this point, we think it would have to be a meeting.
Okay.
And it would essentially be two items. The first one's rewriting our resolution, and the second one would be a board decision on that new resolution language. Is that correct?
Yes, correct.
Which could both occur in one meeting.
But the one could almost occur today, right? A resolution to,
I believe you would need the specific language. I'd hate to make assumption that, legal would have to figure out what that language is.
Yeah.
Can we deliberate on the matter, or should we wait until we have that resolution language?
We would want to bring it before you at a subsequent meeting.
Yeah. I'm available. I'm happy to meet over the holidays. I'm not going anywhere. I do just want to say, I do appreciate, Drew, you not asking us for any type of a reduction. And also just because I know how hard it is to bring a project of this magnitude forward. So, I
wouldn't say anything. You need help and going to campaign for increase, believe me, I'm not. And ever support, I've seen it right up front, so I appreciate what the department does. And maybe this is unfortunate, but if you had more attention than you probably would want from the fire department. But it's been all a good interaction, and last year it was crazy. Flat roof of 36,000 feet. You can only imagine the loads that were out there. And Chief was up on the roof with us. We had propane brakes, we had structural failures. I mean, you name it, we had it. And it was a real mess. And they really helped us in a time of need when blizzarding, which is a real problem. So I can't see anything but good things out there that you can work. You need a spokesman for the and I will say this much. When I was listening to the discussion, this is off topic, but I said I'd throw it out. Voters, well, at least when I heard that, I said, what am I getting for it? And when it's described as like, hey, we're just doing services and they're kind of in general, the more you define what it is you're gonna do, I think you'll have more success convincing voters that, and even a higher amount, that they would be more willing to do that. They actually knew where the money was going, the benches, and how to think of a government fund. And I don't really do work, so that's my 2 cents.
Thank you.
So I would ask if you're looking for kind of staff to move forward on tweaking the resolution a little bit. We have a resolution item and then a second item that would allow the board to move, that potentially we just set up a quick committee with 2 board members that can give input on where you think the board as a whole wants to go. So we can draft this accordingly, recognizing, the goal is to move away from this. This resolution is old. It's actually a rewrite of a 2007 resolution. So we do need to move that forward. So this will help kind of set the stage for kind of board guidance on how firm the board wants to be on these types of issues. But it shouldn't be, it's not going to be, set in stone for the long future. So if there's 2 members that would be willing to do that in the next week, that'd be appreciated.
So do you need a motion to table this until?
I don't believe we need a motion. I just believe we need staff direction at this point.
Yeah,
So,
definitely.
I think you have it.
okay. And do we have 2 members that be willing to be involved in the project?
Mhm.
Okay. So.
Okay.
Is it, just to clarify for my notes, is it staff direction to amend the resolution and then to look at the scheduling a special meeting?
Staff direction to look at appropriate language to amend the resolution and to potentially set a second meeting with Commissioners Curry and Mendel being involved in those discussions.
So
Thank you.
you're being appointed as kind of like an ad hoc, so you're.
I'm sorry, you were a little broken. Can you repeat that?
Sorry, you said two vendors were being are being appointed to the is like an ad hoc.
Curry and Mendel.
Okay. And then staff direction is to bring back options on either amending the resolution or other considerations if we find any for addressing impact fees.
Correct.
So Chief, could I get some understanding of your process?
Yeah.
I'm not familiar with.
Sure. So, yep. So the intent would be for us to look at, basically, we have certain rules we have to follow within our diff plan and how we collect diff. So we would look at potentially adjusting that language and we would write up some recommendations. Language is silent on the matter. So then we would bring the board, at least a quorum of the board back together within a timely fashion to still get you to your December 31st deadline. The board would move in one direction or another. And at that'll be a second meeting after this, basically. And we could give you a direction at that point.
Well, thank you very much for the consideration. I know this is a little out of left field for the normal fire department and stuff, but I hope there's a day when I can invite you all to the roof of the camera.
Thank you for your presentation.
I appreciate you taking on such a task anyway.
It's, yeah. A lot of people told me I was crazy when I said
It needs to be
you
done.
all know Paul.
Yeah.
This has been through a couple of
Right.
iterations and I was very lucky to have a group of very high professional kids and everybody else in 2019 that was available because I was actually building the Apple to create a campus to oversee Europe. And it turned out that all that team, the mechanical engineers, the fire, Jetson Hughes fire guys, the architect, these were all a big thing. And they all said, we're starting to can, we do a really good deal and all and so forth. So I said, okay, let's go do this project.
It's a good place to start.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you. That'll move us on to 8C, consideration to enter into services agreement with Ricer LLC for code compliance management of fire district systems.
Could I interrupt momentarily?
Yeah.
Sorry, Commissioner, I'm going to have to depart. So I apologize for that. Got a hard stop here. But I do think that after I leave, you should make Commissioner Easterby take the oath again. But not until after I leave. Okay. Thank you, and I
Appreciate
apologize.
that. Most of the rest of this is informational, so I can get you up to speed. And then I'll get with legal and we'll figure out the best way to
Okay.
proceed with this
Yeah,
next item.
thank you.
So I'm not sure if everybody had a chance to read the staff report from Chief Morrow. This is a pretty basic agreement. We've looked at this in the past with Chief Freevault. Bryster is basically a company. What they do is they manage that process of renewing sprinkler, 5-year renewals and that sort of thing. So they take pressure off Natalie and her team to get that done. There's no cost to the district on this. It's a $17 cost per inspection roughly to do this that is absorbed by the recipient of the inspection. So it'll allow for her to get a little organized and take work off of her. It's used by quite a few districts. We have looked at this in the past. If you take a look at the attachment on that, it lists who those other users are. But fairly straightforward. It's basically a agreement for services that will not have a negative impact on the district and a minimal impact on any of our commercial users of it.
That seems to be a no-brainer. We need a motion for that?
We do because we're entering into an agreement, so we would need a motion to enter into a services agreement with Brycer LLC.
Okay,
I'll move to approve the agreement with Brycer LLC.
any discussion, questions? No.
I'll second the motion.
Madam Chair Gray, what is your vote?
Aye.
Commissioner Easterby, what is your vote?
Yes.
Commissioner Truax, what is your vote?
Yes.
Commissioner Bolton, what is your vote?
Yes.
And sorry, just clarify, we had a second, right?
Yes,
Did you
we
say
had a
It
second.
was Commissioner Truax.
No, I made the motion.
Easterby.
Commissioner Easterby seconded.
Sorry, Dave Easterby correctly.
Thank you.
The motion carried 4-0.
Okay. Item D, consideration to upgrade the fire district Knox box system to the E-lock system for approximately 22,114.23.
So for those of you that are aware, the Knox box system is basically the department keys that allow us to enter into facilities. It's kind of a trust between ourselves and the community. What happens is anytime a new construction occurs above a certain square footage or commercial, there is a Knox box that's placed on that residence or commercial unit. The district has keys that open that Knox box, and those are on all of our apparatus. Those have a security system where basically whoever needs to remove that key to open the Knox box punches in their code and it creates a log. And that is kind of the security measure. Over time, that system has improved significantly, and essentially the new system would take significant liability off the district in a situation where a key got lost or anything of that matter, because the new keys are basically digital. And what they do is not only do they track who has that key, they also track which Knox boxes they open. They can also be wiped if for some reason they need to get destroyed. So this is kind of a no-brainer from a liability perspective. We're at a point where we've been looking at this for about a year, but we actually had failures in the old systems. We could replace the old systems, but the reality is it would be kind of a piecemeal thing and we'd start moving in. It makes a lot more sense to just move into the new system as these things have been lost and replace the whole fleet. So this is really the next generation system. Chief Such, who oversees our more technical IT things, can speak on how this works. But that's basically kind of the 10,000 foot view of what this does.
Draw like your more. Functionally, it's escrow, and we keep the apartment's keys in a box. We have access to that box, so we can get those keys out in emergency, not being smashed every door. This system is basically setting up how we keep track of those keys and keep them secured so that people can't just walk up, steal our fire engine, and then go drop them. This also has some very nice benefits for us in that, and manage the entire fleet and all of the passcodes to go ahead and get access to these devices from one place very quickly and easily, as opposed to taking a laptop to each fire engine all over town, connecting up to it. And basically, we've had failures now in some of our older equipment and can't talk to the device anymore to get the keys out or really do much of anything.
One other benefit that I would note on this is the company has actually made it reasonable to do a transition because they realize that, you could put out a resolution saying everybody's got to work on replacing all of these. Basically, and Jeff will correct me again, he's the one that knows this system a little better. You can either stay with your old system, you'll still have that and you're grandfathered in essentially. Everybody new will move into the new system. The cost differential is actually low because you're paying for a proprietary system, not for the actual box so much. It's just a box. But there's also a mechanism for switching old ones over if people choose to do that. And
It's functionally, it's very similar to any handset on the door. If you have a key, if you have a Schlage keyway, you can pull your Schlage keyway out and you can slide this new keyway in. And it functions the same thing with the Knox keyway. Actually, that's what we're doing. We're moving through the mechanical keyway to the electronic keyway. So, and again, it has all the extra reporting features where it's not just, oh, I put the key out, but I put it right back in. It would let us be able to review the fact that somebody took the key out and used it at 4 different addresses and then put the key back. So it's a lot more information that the mechanic just doesn't get.
Any questions?
I always have some questions.
Of course, yeah.
One is, there's multiple brands, I would suppose, of this type of new.
This is actually a sole source.
They're pretty much the
The-
100-pound robot.
Yeah.
Got it. And then the second thing is, so this is basically to get into facilities that require keys now, so you'd be able to get into a lock. What if they're not using keys?
We have our own master.
Okay,
So a couple of things. These are boxes. I believe long-term, we're actually gonna change some of our standard procedures. For example, for the village, we had us put in about 17 of these and they're at every exit. It doesn't flow well in an emergency because, Captain Kaler might go to that exit and then another captain shows up, now it's full. So a lot of places move to a larger box at some, for example, the Westin has a control room where you would have a larger box. So there's options there to where you can put in card keys, whatever that is. I would say that, there is significant trust that the community is giving us by giving us keys to their house or keys to their business. And we have a fiduciary responsibility to make sure we're keeping up with the most modern system. So from that perspective to where I can say, no, your house is safe and we can show who entered it and why, it's something that we kind of owe the public essentially.
Sorry, yeah, I think I misunderstood your question, but with a doorway that doesn't have a key per se, they have a code.
yes.
People often write it down on a piece of paper. I've seen that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We have hotel keys inside. So there's a variety. It's basically a box. It's a lock box.
Thank you.
Yeah, I mean, I have one of these boxes at, I have a Knox box at Edison Hall, the Mammoth Lakes Foundation building. And I have to say, I mean, not that we ever really had any issues or expect to, but I do think, in thinking about the community as a whole, it's like, yeah, this is a lot of money to spend, obviously. But I do like the increased data that we can get in terms of, who accessed a building and when, and I mean, that's pretty standard these days. So I'm supportive.
It's kind of an insurance policy because the future loss as well, so. As more and more these get put in, lost keys become more and more expensive.
Yep.
Sure.
There are districts that have rekeyed their whole area that they're responsible for at, hundreds of thousands of dollars when there's been issues. So again, in some ways, this is a, insurance policy, as Chief Walker mentioned.
Any more discussion? Nope. Then I would move to upgrade the fire district Knox box system.
Second.
Commissioner Easterby, how do you vote?
Yes.
Chair Curry, how do you vote?
Aye.
Commissioner Truax, how do you vote?
Yes.
Commissioner Hopefully, how do you vote?
Yes.
This motion also carries 4-0.
Okay, so go ahead, Chair.
One more consideration here.
We're getting there. This is a long meeting.
Yeah.
Consideration of the site license agreement with the county of Mono to locate Chris communication equipment at Fire Station 1.
Yep. And I'll keep most of these brief. If you want more information, please ask. So this is the site agreement for the county who's acting on behalf of Cal OES, who's overseeing the CRIS system, which is going to be our main radio system. We have what's going to be a full repeater site back here at the station. This allows for them to place repeater equipment inside the station. Again, just to give you the quick version of the history, we were looking at building a system ourselves a while back, which would have been probably, once all said and spoken for, it would have been about $1 million to cover the district. Fortunately, the county was able to pick up some federal earmarks that they've put towards the CRIS system. The state is picking up the repeaters that they were going to build anyways. We build it buying into that contract, and will be essentially held to purchasing our own handhelds and repeaters and some subscription fees, which will be we'll get some credit for the work that's being done. So just part of that larger process. Chief Such might hit on it really quickly again under his notes, but this is the agreement that basically allows for that equipment to be placed on our facility for the foreseeable future.
Any questions? No. I need a motion.
It's also worth noting, if the board's reading, that the district has already committed per the board's direction about $50,000 on renovation work for that building to be able to get the repeater equipment in there and have it properly climatized and that sort of thing. So essentially the board has made this commitment on the system. This is the agreement with the county that lets that.
So we don't need to,
We still have to sign into that agreement with the county, but
okay.
in the big picture, this is something that we've been moving forward
Right.
with for a while.
So we do need a motion to enter into the license agreement, correct, Chief?
Correct, yes.
I would, Dave Easterby would make a motion to enter the license agreement.
Any questions?
I'll second. Sorry.
Chair Curry, what is your vote?
Aye.
Commissioner Easterby, what is your vote?
Yes.
Commissioner Truax, what is your vote?
Yes.
Commissioner Paul, what is your vote?
Yes.
Motion carries 4-0.
Okay. Chief Tolmeyer, would you like to take the staff reports?
Yeah, so we'll go through these pretty quickly, but Chief Walker was just going to give an update on, we've done quite a bit of facilities work, so trying to keep you up to speed on where all
Okay.
that is.
Guys, yeah, probably see the tank got completely reskinned this year. We tore it apart last year. We also put our major renovation to the inside, ended up getting some industrial shelving, reorganized, got rid of a bunch of stuff. It's pretty good there now. It's quite better than it has in a long time. Powerwall Workstation 2 is finally up on the creation after 6 months of messing with it, but essentially it's a backup battery system that runs the station. Right now it's set up at, it runs the station from 2 p.m. to 11 p.m. at night, keeping it off of peak power. We did have a good test of it this a couple of weeks ago. Power went out in Old Mammoth, the whole town. I'm not entirely sure, but ran the station for about 10 hours. Looks like it'll, if it's in a full charge when it starts, it'll run that station for about a 24-hour period. So a little bit of work to get to where we are, but it seems to be working pretty good now. We are getting a similar system here at Station 1. One of the things we just got completed a week or two ago was move the rock wall, and you guys noticed the generator room, push that rock wall back. That would be the location of these batteries that will run Station 1 will be located. Backup fuel storage is in place and full. That was a good question.
Are those all lithium batteries?
Yes.
Yeah. A large number of them?
At Station 2, there's 7 Tesla Powerwall units, which creates probably 210 amps worth of service, which is more than the service of the station actually. Here, it's a different system. This is commercial 3-phase. So these are, it's going to be 1 or 2, basically like a big walk-in refrigerator. They're self-contained units in their own little housings. They'll be sitting outside. In that area, like I said, we're doing that rock wall.
Okay.
And this project is probably, they told me some, what that actually means. This has been going on for well over a year and a half, 2 years now, just to get it, but this is where we're at, so.
Yeah.
But nothing's happening till then.
Yeah.
Um,
Okay, let's move on to the Chris radio system update. Chief Such?
So, progress continues, hopefully slowly, looking at the speed of business here. The state is basically waiting to receive the rest of their Motorola equipment to go throughout the rest of the county. It's gonna be, it changed up their implementation process a little bit. They're gonna go and switch to taking on some of the non-public safety agencies first to basically further test the system and make sure that it's going to be adequate for what we're trying to do. And in other good news, the community water district has also signed on, so they will be using that system as well.
Good. Mhm.
And well, we're approving the site license agreements, so we can get our antenna and repeater.
Very good.
Waiting on them to come out and install. We're also adding our new water tender, 3381. We're going to be putting the new radios into that water tender.
Mhm.
Chief Walker and I will be testing it out with the programming, see if we can actually get it to connect. And then the county has not physically received all of the equipment. Most of the equipment is actually with the installers up there, but it's coming.
Good, good. Any questions?
Yep.
Okay. We'll move on to the district fire chief reports.
So I'll just give a quick update on our wildland program. One thing of note is I do plan on putting in a comment for the district for the ESC CRP draft environmental assessment, which is basically the donut project, if you're, as it's fondly referred to. We've been working closely with Janet Hatfield on her team on this for the last year, but it's at the point where the forest is looking for official comments. We've commented on pieces of this, so we'll be really pushing forward on it. The one area that there's some hesitation on there's two that they're considering. One is called IRAs, which are areas that are considered roadless, and they would prefer not to do any work on those at the region level. There's a lot of reason why that's not a good idea. Basically, fire doesn't care about jurisdictions or that sort of thing. The two IRAs that really concern me are up in the Sherwins, where you see all kind of the dead trees up there. Again, as you're familiar with Embercast, that can certainly travel into town. So in the past, we've recommended kind of a 3 to 5 mile buffer around town that they work within those IRAs as well. That would include the lake space, and there's some in that area as well. The other thing is the project is looking at being shrunk potentially. I believe our initial stance should be to support the project as is in its entirety moving forward. So working closely with that team, been working on their financial advisory teams, and we'll be putting that comment from the district to further their work. We've had quite a bit of overlap on things to where we're supporting each other's grant projects. So they've obviously been working with the Fire Safe Council to help, support some of that work. So kind of good collaborations, and we want to make sure we get some input. Generally on these types of projects, you hear from people that are just upset about little things here and there. They're very vocal, and sometimes comments like ours don't get in. So we need to make sure we do that. The other one, I just want to give you a quick update on the Valentine Reserve. That's obviously been one of our biggest target hazards, just due to kind of the topography where it comes into town and then continues into Mammoth Creek and then kind of, down through into Snow Creek. So the good work that was done on Mammoth Creek, we want to continue working that patch of ground. We got quite a few piles burned this year. There's some that we didn't get to that we hope to get to early next spring, so we get them before the fire season. But we want to start to expand that project to the other side of the creek there, which is going to be difficult work, and then really up into Panorama Dome. So you see Santa Barbara owns that piece right below Panorama Dome, and we walked the site with Chief Henson, who was a Forest Service fire chief for a long time, but now provides support work for us. And long-term, there's some plans to really start thinning out Panorama Dome. That's going to be very expensive work. A lot of it's going to have to be done by helicopter. White Bark is looking in, we're putting in some grants. We have some grant funding from CAL FIRE that might help with the CEQA side and the planning side of that, with them having the grants for the implementation of that. And really the long-term goal would be to really thin that area out and ideally have the Forest Service potentially, and this would be a potential, 5-year project with multiple phases, but the last piece being to do a controlled burn where you're burning downhill. So it's burning like back towards you, and you can creep to the bottom of Panorama Dome and create that buffer there. There is an area there that is difficult to work if you're familiar with the Mill City track that has issues with, previous mining work there that essentially the Forest Service will not work on, which makes it so much more important that we get these adjacent parcels. So good work there again, working with UC Santa Barbara and Janet and her team at White Park. So just a quick update on that. And then fire cell tower project. So an update on that, it was obviously passed this board a few months ago. It went to Planning Commission in November. The assessor's office provided some documentation for the Planning Commission, but they had missed a couple parcels. So in trying to be good stewards and have, we received direction from this board to make sure we're having a good conversation with the community. We felt it was worth pausing for a little bit and making sure that everybody has an understanding of that project that might not have been involved in the process. It does slow it down a bit, but we're working closely with Creek House HOA, as well as with Chuck Landy to make sure that everyone's given an opportunity to understand kind of how we got to the point that we did. See if there are any proposed alternate sites. One of the things we talked about is we couldn't put it on kind of the east side of our building in the trees there, just because we would lose our road, but they have some land that they could maybe, one, allow us to put in our easement and maybe give us a road on their property so we could still get our rigs all the way around if that was a better site from a aesthetics perspective. So just looking at some other options with the intent from AT&T planning and the fire district to have this on the February 14th agenda before the planning commission. So just giving a little bit more of an opportunity for the public to understand the project. And the last item I had is full-time administrative hiring process. We had a committee, basically the division chiefs went through a hiring. We had 8 individuals that applied, and I'll be working with the top 5 per our MOU within the next week or so. So hoping to have a firefighter hired within a few weeks here. They'll obviously have to give notice at their other job, but have them, up and running at the beginning of next year. We had some really strong candidates. I say the hardest part of this job is talking to the people that can't get the job. So again, I'm really pleased with kind of the turnout we had.
Okay. Thank you for that. Next item is board member comments. Anybody got a comment?
I do. Is anyone else attending any of the AAR workshops?
Yeah. Yeah, I've got a couple that I'm going to.
Just to make sure we don't run into any Brown Act issues.
I don't know.
Would
Yeah.
you explain what that acronym is? AAR?
The after action report from last winter, the town has a consultant. So I can just let you guys know, the ones that I am planning to attend are the public information and messaging discussion. That's tomorrow. And then on Friday, the winter storm fire and public safety response discussion and the propane and utilities discussion. Unfortunately, I have a conflict. I can't go to the town leadership one, but do you know which ones you're going to? Rob?
Yeah, I think I'm on the leadership and also the fire department.
So, and Commissioner Easterby, just to get you caught up, the town has put together a process to do an after action review on the winter emergencies. It's a good opportunity to have input on the subject and look at, potential recommendations for the community as a whole, which include things like, are we providing adequate fire services and from somebody other than ourselves? The group that's doing it did the Paradise Fire, so they're a, fairly professional group. They've been used on kind of some larger projects, and ideally we have representation in some of those key committees. Sounds like that's already occurring. We just want to make sure we don't have more than 2 members working on those. If you're interested in any of those, I can take you through the list and we can see, which ones might be available. That's on Thursday and Friday.
Thank you. I'd like to see that. And then, Commissioner Trex mentioned the Brown Act. So at attendance of any one of those meetings, if there were any of us, we wouldn't want to discuss anything at that meeting for.
So any of these public meetings, you can have 2 individuals can be at those meetings. And again, Michael can correct me on anything. So this will actually have attendance by town council members, board of supervisors. The one that we will not be at is the one on the town leadership. So that'd be great to have. It sounds like Commissioner Curry is going to be attending that one. And those are really important, but you can have discussions. There is no action that's going to be taking at those, but you obviously can't have 3 members there. So
Okay, that's what I wanted to.
is that a correct statement
Yeah,
from?
That's what
the
I
knowledge
was
you have?
asking.
Yeah, a quorum of the board can, a quorum of the
Yeah, I
board
thought
can things within their jurisdiction.
That's right. That's right. So I'd have to coordinate to see who's going where if I were to go to one of those meetings.
Correct, yes. And I have kind of a list of which, there's a couple that are less relevant to the fire district, some that are more relevant. So, we can maybe even have Caroline kind of coordinate who's going to which ones to make sure. Obviously, 3 of you show up, 1 of you is going to have to leave.
Yeah.
But it'd be nice to have that planned out ahead of time. So you can attend, yeah, it just, we can't have, yeah. So
No.
we're going to have multiple staff members attending quite a few of those. So, but as far as board goes, there can only be 2 of you.
That's right.
Thanks for going to that town leadership one, Roger.
Yeah, okay. Anything else? We'll move on. Legal advice. Michael?
Just a clarification, so you may be able to attend the event, but you can never have a quorum of the board that's gonna not only just to even discuss something, not even just take action, but you may in some situations be able to attend meetings, even if there is more than 3, but I'll discuss that with staff for clarification. And then the second issue is just for clarification. So we are going to look at the options on the resolution for the development impact fees, including whether there might be ways short of revising the resolution to do that. So we'll work with staff and bring that back as soon as possible.
Okay, terrific. Thank you. Tyson, anything from the association? Okay. Administrative business. Caroline?
I don't think it came up in the next meeting.
We also have the rotation of the positions.
So the next meeting is tentatively scheduled for noon on Tuesday, January 16th. Still showing hands, since everyone.
Yeah, we're good.
And then, yeah, administratively, we rotate the board officers in the first meeting, or for the first meeting in January. So we will be saying goodbye to Sheriff Curry. John Mandel will be taking on the position of board chair. And even though they are fairly new to the board, Betsy will be vice chair and Chris will be secretary. You don't have a lot of duties.
I'm just
If John's unable to chair a meeting, obviously we could have Betsy to chair that meeting and chief to review some of their things. to review, but that's just administratively what we've always done, so.
Okay. We're adjourned. 2:35.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you, everyone.
Oh.